Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onouphrios Dovlepis, and together we'll discover the not so frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. Cleopatra's legacy as a Greek and Egyptian ruler. So how did Cleopatra's Greek heritage and Egyptian loyalty shape her legacy? Cleopatra was a queen who saw herself as both a Greek ruler and an Egyptian pharaoh, and she used her dual identity to connect with different cultures as well. In several books or other podcasts that I listen to, they keep referring to her as Egyptian, Macedonian, or Macedonian Greek. Out of those, the one that is the most suitable, let's say, is the Macedonian one. But this is like being abroad and saying, I'm a Londoner or I'm Texan, which some Americans actually tell me, to be honest. But okay, that's a different thing. So the use of the word Macedonian makes sense within Greece, not abroad. It's like, for instance, saying me going abroad and people asking me, where are you from? And me saying, I'm Athenian. Who gives a damn? I'm Greek. And then if you ask me, where are you from? From Greece. Within Greece, I would say, I'm from Athens. I'm an Athenian, for instance, which I'm not. I'm Macedonian. But I live in Athens. So it's really odd for me when they keep using this whole thing and they say Macedonian. It's like they're saying that they're not saying that she was Greek. When I made the famous Macedonians series, my point was to show you the famous people from a specific part of Greece who were Macedonian and, of course, who were Greek. So Cleopatra was simply Greek, or almost all Greek. And you're going to see why I'm saying that. All Greek, almost all Greek. Her relationships with Roman leaders Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were likely influenced by her desire to keep the throne of Egypt. She had previously seen her father struggle for the throne, so she knew what was coming, and of course she understood the importance of political alliances. The Romans portrayed Cleopatra as a foreign temptress, and because they couldn't stand a woman with power, they called her Fatal Monster or Meretrix Regina, whore queen. But time was on her side. She would come to be glorified in art, especially in the 20th century. We'll get to this much later, so be patient. I'm going to talk about a lot of those things that you've seen on TV, in cinema, and so on. I still remember that scene from the 1963 movie with Elizabeth Taylor, where she's taken to Caesar wrapped in a rug, and Caesar unfolds the rug to reveal this mysterious temptress. Very fitting for the larger than life Cleopatra was also the fact that Elizabeth Taylor agreed to play the role for a record setting salary of $1 million. Taylor also earned a Guinness World Record for the most costume changes in a film up to then, which was 65 changes, and the movie was the most expensive film ever made up to that time, and it also was that year's most successful movie. It makes perfect sense. I love all these things about this trivia about the movies. In that movie, she says something funny to Mark Antony about her unique heritage. So Mark says, I have a fondness for almost all Greek things. And Cleopatra replies, as an almost all Greek thing, I'm flattered. The movie is filled with very witty lines. Cleopatra's argument with her brother Ptolemy the 13th. Over the past decades before her time, there was growing instability within the Ptolemaic dynasty, marked by family feuds, weak leadership, and internal rebellion. That's why Ptolemy the 10th, before her father, went to Rome, hoping to gain support from the Roman Senate to restore him to power. Rome already had influence over Egypt and was a natural destination for deposed rulers that would want to get some help. That's why Caesar ends up in Alexandria and meets Cleopatra. Because although the Egyptian kingdom was supposed to be independent, but at the same time, they needed someone else to help them out with some internal problems, which is really weird. I'm thinking, for example, about the war with Israel and Palestine and other countries that are being asked or who will just intervene to, let's say, kind of solve this problem or the war with Ukraine and Russia. But in this case, imagine this is an internal war. It's like a civil war between the royal family, and they're asking someone else to intervene and solve this. So Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy the 13th become co-rulers as dictated by Egyptian tradition. Oh, and they also got married. That was a royal Egyptian practice, but it was not approved of by the Greeks. Even though the Greek religion had the same practice where siblings Zeus and Hera were married, as we can see, the religion didn't reflect society itself. By the time of Cleopatra, though, the Greek royal family of Egypt had adopted sibling marriage and was considered normal. What was also normal was for Cleopatra to share the throne with a man, no matter how old he was. At the time, Cleopatra was about 18 years old, and Ptolemy the 13th was only about 11. But Cleopatra did something very unorthodox, to use a Greek word. She wanted to be the sole ruler, and she did it. She became one out of five confirmed female pharaohs since 3000 BC. I'm going to say that again because it is mind blowing. Okay, you might be thinking, okay, who cares? It's not a big deal. We're talking about a queen. Who cares about this wealth and power and all these things? But it's really, really impressive. She's one out of the five confirmed female pharaohs since 3000 BC. And the two of them even ruled only for a couple of years. The previous female pharaoh was in about 1190 BC. Initially, Cleopatra attempted to establish herself as the primary ruler, sidelining Ptolemy the 13th. She removed his name from official documents and coins. However, Ptolemy's regents, especially his advisor, a eunuch named Pothinos, tried to diminish Cleopatra's power and assert Ptolemy's rule. The argument escalates. By 48 BC, the tension between the siblings had escalated into open conflict. Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. She sought refuge and began gathering forces to reclaim her throne. We're talking about an actual war between the siblings. The argument reached a dramatic turning point when both Cleopatra and Ptolemaeus were sucked into Roman politics. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria pursuing Pompey during Rome's civil war. Pompey, by the way, was his son in law because Julius Caesar's only daughter, Julia, had married Pompey and even died giving birth to their child. In order to seek Caesar's support, Ptolemy's regent planned the assassination of Pompey, or Pompey. I'm not sure exactly how this is pronounced in English. In Greek, we say Bombios. So they presented Caesar with Pompey's head. We know that Caesar wasn't happy at all, and that totally backfired. In order to seek Caesar's support, Cleopatra famously smuggled herself into the palace, possibly hidden in the carpet that I mentioned earlier. Instead of presenting him with a dead body, she presented her own. She obviously did a better job. Caesar attempted to mediate the dispute between the siblings. Egypt was a big deal for Rome, after all, because it provided food. And it was a big deal also for the Persian Empire 500 years before Cleopatra. As Cleopatra says in the film, Roman greatness built upon Egyptian riches. Ultimately, Caesar sides with Cleopatra, if you hadn't guessed, or if you didn't know. This leads to the Alexandrian War. Caesar's troops fight against Ptolemy and his sister. Surprise! Yes, there was another sister. That sister was called Arsinoe, and she was from the same father. Caesar's forces set fire to ships in Alexandria's harbor to block Ptolemy's fleet. The flames spread to parts of the city, and some sources suggest that the Library of Alexandria caught fire for the first time then because of that war. Cleopatra has something to say about that from the 1963 movie. How dare you and the rest of your barbarians set fire to my library? Play conquer all you want, mighty Caesar. Rape, murder, pillage thousands, millions of human beings. But neither you nor any other barbarian has the right to destroy one human thought. You go, girl. You nailed it. The Romans had previously also destroyed Athens, the very cradle of Western civilization, some 40 years earlier. The Athenians, by the way, when that was about to happen, they sent their people to negotiate with the Romans, and they said, don't destroy Athens. Athens is the cradle of civilization. You barbarian Romans. We had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, you name it. We had all these people. And the Romans said, yeah, no, we don't care. The siblings were defeated by Caesar in their turf, so Ptolemy lost. Almost 15 years old, he drowned in the Nile while trying to flee in 47 BC. Arsinoe was paraded in Rome during Caesar's triumph when he went back. Traditionally, the Romans executed the important captives in front of the people. Imagine the ones that were taken by their kingdoms when they were defeated. They were brought to Rome to be paraded first and then to be executed. But Arsinoe was spared. Keep in mind, by the way, in documentaries, they use the version Arsinoe. They say something like this. Arsinoe is how the name is supposed to be pronounced. It's in Greek anyway. She ended up at the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the wonders of the ancient world. But of course, she was murdered later on. It had been arranged by Cleopatra, obviously. Murdering someone at a temple, which was a refuge, was a huge scandal. That's how Cleopatra solidified her position as ruler of Egypt, though, because she got rid of both of her siblings. But she co ruled with another younger brother, Ptolemy the 14th. There was no end to those complex families. I can't even imagine how you managed to call the right Ptolemy in the palace. There were many. Anyway, the siblings were even married, of course. So even though Ptolemy was also a pharaoh, the actual ruler was her. So let's get to the relationship of Cleopatra with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, as well as her eventual conflict with Octavian and her death. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers. They were actually 30 years apart. And Cleopatra says something really funny about this in the movie. You're being tolerant of me, aren't you? Is it because you're so much older? Well, okay, actually, Elizabeth Taylor said this to Rex Harrison. And by the way, Harrison had been completely overshadowed by the other actors. And if it weren't for a clause in his contract, this is really interesting that I found this information. If it wasn't for a clause in his contract, he wouldn't even be on the posters of the movie. Although he was in half the movie, he was, of course, a famous actor, and this is a major character in the movie. But it would have been only Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. He had the last laugh because he received a leading role Oscar nomination, unlike Taylor and Burton, who were not nominated for this 4 hour long movie. To be honest, I find it surprising. I thought their performances were great, especially Richard Burton's. At the age of 22, Cleopatra has a son with Caesar in June of 47 BC, Ptolemy the 15th Caesar. She claimed that he was Caesar's rightful heir. The boy was also known as Caesarion. The word Caesarion has a Greek ending, this ion, which refers to small things. So it meant something like Little Caesar or Junior. Cleopatra visited Rome with Caesar in 46 BC, causing a scandal due to their relationship and her exotic presence. However, Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, 2 years later. The one who gave the funeral oration was Mark Antony, who was one of his most trusted generals. Antony was even on Caesar's side that day, but the conspirators made sure to distract him. Caesar's assassination left Cleopatra vulnerable, and Caesarion's status as heir was contested, of course. In Egypt, though, he was declared co ruler with Cleopatra. If you're not too confused by now, and if you have a good memory, you might remember that Cleopatra was ruling at the moment with her other brother, Ptolemy XIV. To make her son the king, she probably poisoned her brother Ptolemy the 14th. Siblings murdered by Cleopatra, by the way, 3 out of 5. Not bad for Cleopatra. It makes you wonder what we would do in their places. And to be honest, God knows how close they really were to each other. But keep in mind, I always say that it's do or die. If you don't kill them, they will kill you. Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony began in 41 BC and became both a romantic and political partnership. He was almost the same age as the year that they met. So about 41, 42. That's when they met, and that's how old he was. But they had probably met before. After all, Antony had gone to Alexandria in 55 BC to also help Cleopatra's father. That means that she would have been 15 and he was 28. When they finally met again in 41 BC, she was finally the same age as he was back then. Now she was 28. So keep in mind when, if you ever watched the movie, Cleopatra is supposed to be 28 when she finally meets Mark Antony. Antony summoned Cleopatra to the city of Tarsus to discuss her loyalty to Rome. Cleopatra arrived in a grand display with a splendid ship portraying herself as the goddess Isis. That, of course, captivated Antony. Tarsus is located in what is now southern Turkey. Earlier known as a Hittite city, the Greeks later called it Antiochia on the Cydnus to distinguish it from the Antiochia of Syria. It was in that river, Cydnus, that Alexander the Great took a bath and nearly died in 333 BC. Some 300 years later, Cleopatra will sail up the river to meet Antony on her impressive ship. Let's see how writer Plutarch describes it. She came sailing up the river Cydnus in a barge with gilded stern and outspread sails of purple, while oars of silver beat time to the music of flutes and fifes and harps. She herself lay all along under a canopy of cloth and gold, dressed as Aphrodite in a picture, and beautiful young boys like painted cupids stood on each side to fan her. About 20 years before Cleopatra met with Antony, the Roman general Pompey had taken Tarsus over. It was briefly renamed Juliopolis to flatter Julius Caesar, so the polis, the city of Julius. That's a great irony. Pompey, who eventually fights with Caesar, he even named the city after Caesar. 45 years after the meeting of the legendary couple, Tarsus became the birthplace of a man named Saul. He would come to be known as Paul the Apostle. Antony and Cleopatra became lovers and allies. But the next year, in 40 BC, when Antony returned to Rome, he was asked to marry Octavian's sister, Octavia. Nevertheless, Antony and Cleopatra continued their relationship and they had 3 children together. The twins, Alexander Helios means sun, and Cleopatra Selene, that's the moon, and Ptolemy Philadelphos, which means obviously the one who loved his brother. Just like Philadelphia, the city. So it has to do with that, to love your brother. That could definitely not be said about his mother. She didn't love her brothers or sisters. The first two practically complemented each other as the moon and the sun. Alexandros and Cleopatra, the sun and the moon. This was exactly the same symbolism as the twin gods Apollo and Artemis. As you can see, she selected gods both from the Greek and the Egyptian pantheon. So she used Isis, she used Apollo, she used Artemis, the sun, the moon, and all these things. And keep in mind, although the children are born to a Roman father, and in the kingdom of Egypt, all of their names are Greek. Alexandros, Helios, Cleopatra, Selene, Ptolemaeos, Philadelphos, all these are Greek. Greek words. There's nothing Egyptian, there's nothing Roman. The donations of Alexandria. In 34 BC, Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra staged a triumph after Antony's successful campaign in Armenia. To celebrate his success, Antony stages this grand ceremony in Alexandria rather than in Rome. This raised suspicions about his loyalty to Rome. This should have happened in Rome. In that ceremony, Antony distributed Roman territories to Cleopatra and their children. Obviously, Cleopatra was very keen on expanding her kingdom, but at the same time, she worked to revive Egypt's economy and focused on agriculture and trade. That's why she supported the development of canals to improve irrigation to increase productivity. We must not forget that Egypt was the main supplier of grain to Rome, and this allowed Cleopatra to maintain a strong economic relationship with Rome. She even funded the troops of Antony. But of course, no one loved the great show more than her. Cavafis, the modern Greek poet from Alexandria, wrote the poem Alexandrian Kings about all of this. Here's just a few lines from that. Caesarion was standing in front of the others, dressed in pink silk. On his chest, a bunch of hyacinths. His belt, a double row of amethysts and sapphires. His shoes, tied with white ribbons, prinked with rose colored pearls. They declared him greater than his little brothers. They declared him king of kings. The Alexandrians knew, of course, that this was all mere words, all theater, theatrics. But the day was warm and poetic, the sky a pale blue, the Alexandrian Gymnasium a complete artistic triumph, the courtiers wonderfully sumptuous, Caesarion all grace and beauty, Cleopatra's son, blood of the legates, and the Alexandrians thronged to the festival, full of enthusiasm, and shouted acclamations in Greek and Egyptian and some in Hebrew, charmed by the lovely spectacle, though they knew, of course, what all this was worth, what empty words they really were, these kingships. Ήξευραν τι άξιζαν αυτά, τι κούφια λόγια ήσαν αυτές οι βασιλείες. In that ceremony, Antony and Cleopatra sat on golden thrones. He was dressed as Dionysus Osiris, and she was dressed as Aphrodite Isis. Again, a combination of Greek and Egyptian gods, but not names. Just it wasn't about the name specifically, it was about the gods, because this is the main symbolism. Cleopatra was, after all, the divine queen of Egypt, whom the great Caesar himself had accepted and honored as an incarnation of Venus. He had actually made a statue of her in Rome. Caesarion was depicted as the Egyptian god Horus and was declared king of kings. That's what Cavafis was talking about. Richard Burton's line in the movie is very indicative of his. Okay, there was just a car crash. It makes sense. People here do act like crazy. So Richard Burton's line in the movie is very shows, let's say, how much he loved Cleopatra. He says, "I am no longer a Roman. I am only yours." By the way, have you ever thought in what language they talked to each other? Because she was Greek and he was Roman. Marcus Antonius spoke Greek anyway, and when he met Cleopatra, he started dressing like a Greek, not like an Egyptian. This is very interesting because you would expect that he meets the Queen of Egypt and he would dress like an Egyptian, but she was Greek, so he dressed like a Greek. So these conversations most likely happened in Greek, which actually was the international language back then, and the language of the educated people, something like French in the past. Mark Antony's act of giving away territories that were occupied by the Romans angered Rome, especially Octavian, who was Caesar's heir. Antony and Octavian were part of a political alliance, actually, which was formed after the assassination of Julius Caesar, and they made this alliance to consolidate power and avenge Caesar's death. They did defeat the leaders of Caesar's assassination, Brutus and Cassius, in two major battles at Philippi in Macedonia, the land where Cleopatra's ancestors were from. Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus whom you've never heard of. He didn't really become famous, and even his when he's depicted in movies, who cares? They were called triumvirs for the restoration of the Republic. Ironically, their actions further dismantled the Roman Republic. The Republic even disregarded monarchy. That's a total joke. Right after this, it became an empire. The Romans also viewed the Egyptian religion as inferior because it involved gods that were half animal, that came from the people whose founding story was about two brothers that fed from a wolf and then one killed the other. The fact that Romans would think of anyone as inferior, let alone Egypt, and specifically at this moment, a culture that combines Greece and Egypt, the ultimate ancient people, it's hilarious. And we're not done. This is to be continued in the next episode, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onufrios Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.